Have you ever pulled a bill out of your wallet, stared at it, and asked yourself, why is this piece of paper have value? It's not food, it's not a weapon, and you certainly can't use it to build a house. So why does the whole world go crazy for it? The answer you think you know actually changed completely on a fateful Sunday more than 50 years ago. Here is the shocking truth. The money you hold in your hand today is, technically, worthless in the literal sense compared to the currency of the past. Before 1971, every dollar bill was a receipt for real gold sitting in a treasury vault. But after a bold, risky, and secretive decision by President Richard Nixon, that link was severed forever. That was the moment money became pure faith, and the moment the global economy entered an era of endless debt and inflation. Welcome to the story of the Nixon Shock, the historic moment that killed the gold standard and changed your wallet forever. To understand the scale of the disaster, we must travel back in time to 1944 as World War II was drawing to a close. At a secluded hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, representatives from 44 nations gathered to redesign the world's financial order. The world was in ruins. European economies had collapsed, and they needed absolute stability to rebuild. Their solution was the Bretton Woods system. The rule was simple but incredibly powerful. The US dollar would be king. Every other currency in the world, like the British pound, French franc, Japanese yen, would be pegged to the US dollar. And most importantly, so the whole world would trust this green piece of paper, the US pledged that any central bank could exchange $35 for 1 ounce of pure gold in return. At that time, the US held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. The US dollar was gold, and gold was the US dollar. No one doubted it. This system created an era of unprecedented stability. Global trade boomed because no one had to worry about wildly fluctuating exchange rates. A business in London knew exactly how much gold they would get when selling goods to New York. It was like a giant anchor keeping the global economic ship steady against the waves. But within that stability, a seed of destruction began to sprout, a fatal flaw that no one anticipated: the temptation to spend more than you have. The 1950s and 1960s are often remembered as the golden age of capitalism. America rose to become the undisputed superpower. The middle class expanded, houses and cars became the norm, and the American dream was brighter than ever. The US dollar was welcomed in every corner of the planet, from Paris to Tokyo, as a symbol of power and absolute trust. But behind that glamour was a dark truth slowly revealing itself. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. government under President Lyndon B. Johnson began pursuing a guns and butter policy. They wanted it all: huge spending on domestic social welfare programs, butter, and escalating the costly war in Vietnam. To pay for these ambitions, the U.S. did what any nation would do: print more money. Billions of dollars were pumped into the economy and flowed overseas through aid and military spending. But remember the core rule: $35 for 1 ounce of gold. The amount of paper dollars skyrocketed, but the amount of gold in Fort Knox did not increase. In fact, it was decreasing. A famous anecdote tells that French President Charles de Gaulle, always suspicious of American power, realized this game. He publicly declared that the US dollar was enjoying an exorbitant privilege and that the US was exporting inflation to other countries. Not just all talk. De Gaulle ordered the French Navy to ship tons of paper dollars to the US to demand real gold in return to take back to Paris. This action was like a warning shot. We know you don't have enough gold. Trust began to crack, and the global economy based on gold began to shake violently. By 1971, the situation was critical. Inflation in the U.S. was escalating, and the trade balance fell into deficit for the first time in the 20th century. But the knockout punch came from the United Kingdom. In early August 1971, the British ambassador requested to exchange $3 billion for gold. The U.S. panicked. If this request were fulfilled and other countries followed suit, America's gold reserves would be drained in the blink of an eye. America was standing on the brink of international default.
On Friday, August 13, 1971, President Nixon took an unprecedented secret action. He summoned his top economic advisors, including Treasury Secretary John Connally and Paul Volcker, who later became the legendary Fed chairman, to Camp David, the presidential retreat. This meeting was so secret that no one was allowed to make outside calls, and the press was completely misled about the trip's purpose. In a room filled with cigarette smoke and tension, a heated debate ensued. They had two choices. One was austerity, raising interest rates and plunging the U.S. into a recession to protect the dollar's value, political suicide with the 1972 election approaching. Two was to break the promise, tear up the Bretton Woods Agreement, and unilaterally close the gold window. Nixon, a seasoned politician, chose the second option. He chose short-term political gain over long-term financial discipline. On Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, the popular TV show Bonanza was interrupted. Richard Nixon appeared on the screens of millions of American households. With a serious but determined look, he announced, "I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." The word temporarily was the greatest lie of the century. It was never temporary. In that very second, the world financial order collapsed. Stock markets panicked, foreign exchange markets closed. The world woke up on Monday morning to realize their money was no longer backed by anything tangible. Nixon's decision opened the door to the fiat currency era we live in today. The immediate aftermath was a decade of chaos. The 1970s saw skyrocketing inflation, soaring oil prices, and economic stagflation. The dollar devalued terribly, causing people's assets to evaporate. But its long-term legacy is truly frightening and present in your daily life. First, the power of unlimited money printing. Since they are no longer bound by the amount of gold in the vault, governments can print as much money as they like. Did you see the multi-trillion-dollar stimulus packages during the COVID-19 pandemic? That was only possible thanks to the Nixon Shock. If the gold standard still existed, governments could not create money out of thin air to bail out the economy. Second, inflation became a feature, not a bug. Before 1971, prices were relatively stable over long periods. After 1971, prices have had only one trend: up. A house your parents bought for a bargain in 1980 is now worth dozens of times more, not because the house is better, but because the currency has lost so much value. Saving cash became a losing strategy. You are forced to invest in assets to race against the money printer. The core lesson here is modern currency is not a fixed measure of value. It is a flexible political tool controlled by central banks. Wealth lies not in the amount of money you have, but in your ability to preserve your purchasing power against the ceaseless dilution of currency. Looking back, the Nixon Shock of 1971 was not just an economic event, but a philosophical turning point. It marked the shift from intrinsic value, gold, to trust in the state. Richard Nixon may have saved the U.S. from default at that time, but he also handed the world a financial system that is both flexible and fragile, where debt is the fuel and inflation is the price to pay. We are living in a massive monetary experiment that has lasted for over 50 years. The question for the future is, can this fiat currency system last forever as public debts continue to balloon to unimaginable levels? Or will we witness a second Nixon shock, where the world is forced to return to a hard asset or shift to a new digital form like Bitcoin? That is an open question that your own wallet will have to answer in the coming decades. What do you think? Is the paper money in your wallet safe? Or should we go back to gold? Leave your opinions in the comments section. I would love to read your deep thoughts. Don't forget to hit like if you found this video useful. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next fascinating economic history lessons. Thank you for watching, and remember, financial knowledge is the only currency that never inflates.